In September 2025, a shocking discovery ended the search for a missing California teenager and propelled her case from a local story to international headlines instantly. The body of 15-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was found hidden in the trunk of a Tesla registered to rising musical artist David. The car had been impounded at a Hollywood tow yard after sitting abandoned on a residential street, and police were called when a foul odor began emanating from the vehicle. Upon opening the car's front trunk, officers found human remains sealed inside a plastic bag, which were later identified as Celeste's body. The Tesla was registered under David's legal name, immediately tying the 20-year-old singer, real name David Anthony Burke, to the scene. At present, these are the few confirmed details of the case, and everything I present in this segment is dealing with present allegations in relation to what happened to Celeste. I'll present the information as it's currently reported up to the morning of September 29th, and you can draw your own conclusions and make up your own mind. Celeste Rivas Hernandez had a history of running away from home, and authorities confirmed she was reported missing at least 3 times in 2024. Her final disappearance was on April 5th, 2024, when Celeste was just 13 years old. After that, she remained missing for nearly 17 months until the grim discovery of her fate in September 2025. In the course of searching for Celeste, one intriguing detail emerged. According to her mother, before she vanished, the teen had been dating someone named David. In fact, friends of David later told a news outlet they had assumed the girl he was hanging out with was his 19-year-old college student girlfriend. She apparently managed to pass herself off as an adult, with investigators saying she possessed multiple fake IDs. Those close to David have claimed they were stunned when her true age came to light, and it hasn't been established whether David knew her actual age, if he knew her at all. Despite these anecdotes, police have not confirmed any relationship between Celeste and David as of this writing. But let's step back here for a second. On September 8th, 2025, a Tesla belonging to David was towed from a Hollywood Hills street after sitting idle for weeks and emitting a foul odor. Tow yard staff alerted authorities, and upon inspection, officers discovered a body hidden in the vehicle's front trunk. The remains, later identified as Celeste, were wrapped in plastic and were severely decomposed, indicating they had been in the car for an extended period. Neighbors reported that the Tesla had been parked on their block for about a month prior to being impounded. At the time, David himself was away on tour in another part of the country, yet his connection to the vehicle instantly placed him at the center of the unfolding case. Within days of the grim find, detectives began piecing together evidence and following leads. On September 17, 2025, about a week after the body was found, officers served a search warrant at a Hollywood Hills home where David had been staying. Investigators seized computers and other electronic devices from the residence as potential evidence. For reasons that are presently unclear and unconfirmed, David and his management team are reported to have promptly vacated that rental house afterward. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner hasn't yet determined the exact cause of Celeste's death. While the case is being treated as potentially involving foul play, it remains unknown how she died or who was involved. One official acknowledged that until a cause of death is established, they can't say for certain if anyone is criminally culpable for the death itself beyond the act of concealing her body. By September 23rd, the coroner released Celeste's remains to her family for burial, even as forensic analysis continued. As of now, police have stated that no person of interest or suspect has been identified so far. According to David's representatives, the singer is, quote, fully cooperating with authorities. Prior to this tragedy, David was primarily known for his music and his online persona as a streamer and a gamer. Notably, in light of the allegations that have come forward, one of his hits, entitled Romantic Homicide, has been reinterpreted to potentially be a self-snitching incident by some online. The music video for this song features a slain woman who some online have alleged looks like Celeste. Notably, the official explanation for the song is that it's a depressing ballad about unrequited love and moving on, and that everything is supposed to be metaphorical. As of today, the death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez remains an open and active investigation. No arrests have been made, and police have not publicly identified any suspects. Importantly, all suspicions and allegations connecting David remain unproven in the absence of concrete evidence. Investigators say they are following up on several leads and awaiting further forensic results before drawing conclusions. Anyway, I've personally gone down the rabbit hole on this case since I had listened to David's music in passing, before knowing anything about Celeste. There's a lot of rumors and speculation floating around online, and as more actual facts come forward, I hope to have an update on Celeste's case. If the rumors are true, the true nature of this story might be much more ugly than can possibly be imagined. But let's let the facts come out. In early March 1975, singer-songwriter Jim Sullivan vanished without a trace in the New Mexico desert, leaving behind an abandoned Volkswagen Beetle. He left behind his guitar, clothes, cash, and unsold records, but there was no sign of the man himself. Sullivan was a 35-year-old musician on a last-ditch journey from Los Angeles to Nashville in hopes of reviving a stalled career. Instead of reaching Music City, he became the center of a haunting mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Jim Sullivan wasn't a household name, but those in late 1960s Los Angeles music circles knew him as a talented folk rock singer who rubbed shoulders with Hollywood royalty. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with a trademark mustache, Sully, as he was known by friends, built a modest following playing nightly at a Malibu bar called The Raft. He even snagged an uncredited cameo in the 1969 legendary road film Easy Rider, thanks to his friendship with actor Dennis Hopper. That same year, Sullivan released his debut album, an offbeat blend of folk, rock, and country tunes. This album, named UFO, featured lyrics musing about long desert highways, leaving home, and even alien abduction, all delivered in Sullivan's haunting, world-weary voice. The album flopped at the time, as did a follow-up record in 1972, but in hindsight, those songs would take on an almost prophetic aura. By 1975, Sullivan's music career had completely stagnated. He struggled with alcohol and his marriage was on the rocks. With 2 young children to support, he decided to make one last attempt at success. This is what would lead him to drive cross-country to Nashville to try his luck as a session songwriter and performer. His wife Barbara and their kids stayed in Los Angeles, planning to join him later if he found footing in the country music capital of the world. On March 4th, 1975, Sullivan packed his Beetle with his prized 12-string guitar, a stash of his vinyl records, and the essentials for the trip. He headed east on the legendary Route 66, chasing one last chance to grasp his fading music dream and achieve the stardom and success that had evaded him. Sullivan's journey appears to have proceeded normally until he reached New Mexico. In the early hours of March 5th, 1975, police in Santa Rosa pulled him over for swerving on the highway. The officers suspected he was drunk as a skunk, but Sullivan passed their sobriety test. It turned out he was simply exhausted after a grueling 15-hour drive. Also, as someone who has done very long road trips before, it's important to stop and rest regularly. As a precaution, police directed him to check into a local motel, the La Mesa Motel in Santa Rosa, to rest before continuing onward. Sullivan obeyed, renting a room for the night, but oddly, he didn't actually stay in it. Records show the motel room's bed was never slept in, and Sullivan left the key inside the room, suggesting he departed shortly after checking in. Before leaving Santa Rosa, he stopped at a liquor store to purchase a bottle of vodka, the last confirmed errand of his life. What happened after is where the trail grows bizarre and cold. Sullivan apparently drove south from Santa Rosa into a very sparsely populated area. On March 6th, his light blue Beetle was spotted on or near a remote ranch property about 25 miles from the motel, in the desert near a place called Puerto de Luna. Some accounts claim Sullivan actually encountered the ranch's owners or workers and was questioned about why he was on their land. By the following day, Sullivan's car was found abandoned on a dirt road not far from the ranch. It was locked, out of gas, and there were no signs of a struggle at the scene. Inside the car were virtually all of Sullivan's worldly possessions. There was no trace of Sullivan himself, and to drop that old tired cliché, he seemed to have just vanished into thin air. Once Sullivan was reported missing, a search was launched by local authorities, volunteers, and his own family who traveled to New Mexico to help. The surrounding desert and ranch land were scoured for any sign of the missing musician. Searchers on foot and horseback navigated arid fields and scrub brush, and a helicopter was briefly deployed as well. Despite these efforts, no evidence of Jim's whereabouts was ever found. One promising lead turned out to be a heartbreaking false alarm. Not long after Jim disappeared, police discovered a decomposed body in a remote area a few miles away, and it was initially thought it could be him. However, forensic examination determined it wasn't Sullivan. Sullivan's motel room in Santa Rosa offered another clue apart from confirming he hadn't slept there. They found that he had called his wife while he was staying there. When they talked to his wife about the conversation, it turned out this call was incredibly unusual and hinted that there was much more going on here. Sullivan sounded extremely distressed and hinted that something odd had happened. She asked what this odd thing was, and he cryptically replied that she wouldn't believe him if he told her. Nearly 50 years have passed, and Jim Sullivan's fate remains a mystery. Over the decades, a number of theories have been proposed, some grounded in cold hard logic and evidence, while others drift into the bizarre. The simplest explanation is that Jim wandered away from his car, became disoriented in the vast desert, and died of exposure. Exhaustion, alcohol, or even a mental breakdown could have led him to stray too far and succumb to the elements. The desert can be deceivingly treacherous, not because people don't realize it's dangerous, but because they don't realize how quickly it can become deadly. If he walked away from his vehicle, he could have become delirious and lost his sense of direction. That said, those who are skeptical of the theory point out that a chopper was used to survey the area immediately after he disappeared. This would have allowed searchers to spot his body, assuming he didn't seek some sort of shelter from the desert heat. Another theory is that Sullivan met with foul play, whether through a chance encounter or something more sinister. Santa Rosa in the 1970s sat along substance trafficking routes, and one idea is that Jim might have stumbled upon illegal activity. Some locals have speculated that the ranch where he was found was owned by a family connected to the mafia. Now, it looks to me that the main reason for this is because the family is Italian-American, which appears to have caused this speculation to take root. And yeah, I'm not kidding, it looks like it's just that, and nothing else, which honestly is a really embarrassing theory to promote in my view. Notably, according to unverified reports, these supposed New Mexico sopranos who owned the ranch moved to Hawaii soon after. Another element that is also claimed is that the local sheriff unexpectedly retired right after the incident as well, though again the evidence is very murky on this. These supposed coincidences have fueled conspiracy theories of a cover-up, yet ultimately there was no hard evidence of foul play ever found. Another theory suggests that he was overwhelmed by his failing career and his obligations to his family and decided to just walk off into the sunset. Under this theory, he was crushed under the weight of the world and couldn't keep going on. Supporters of this theory believe he likely suffered from a mental break, perhaps brought on by a toxic combination of an extreme lack of sleep and heavy consumption of booze. Another variant on this theory suggests that he just voluntarily left his family and started over fresh. Personally, I find it unlikely that he would have left cash behind in his vehicle if this was the case. I can see him symbolically leaving behind his guitar and other belongings, but the idea that a cash-strapped man wanting to start a new life would leave behind any money doesn't make sense. The most otherworldly theory is that literal extraterrestrials took him away in the desert. This theory is largely the result of him having been publicly very into the alien phenomenon, and New Mexico being an alleged hotspot for UFO activity. What truly happened to Jim Sullivan in the New Mexico desert in 1975 may never be known with any certainty. This lack of any certainty is, perhaps paradoxically, what keeps his legacy alive at this point, and continues to generate new interest in his music. Hey everyone, Jimmy reminding you to like and subscribe and to tap the notification bell and click the share button and send it around to your friends and family. Also, don't forget to check out the YouTube membership or the Patreon if you want to support my channel further. On the night of February 9th, 2004, a stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, was about to be the scene of one of the most famous true crime cases of the 21st century. Known locally as Wild Amonoosuc Road, it's a winding rural route, flanked by dense woods and the deep snowbanks of a New England winter. It's not a place you'd want to be stranded, but at approximately 7:30 that evening, that's exactly what happened to 21-year-old Maura Murray. Her black 1996 Saturn sedan spun out on a sharp, icy corner and came to rest facing the wrong direction, wedged against a snowbank. A neighbor, hearing the thump of the crash, called 911. A passing school bus driver stopped and spoke to the young woman at the scene. He saw Maura, who appeared uninjured, but was visibly cold and shivering. He offered help, but she refused it, and by the time the first cop arrived at the scene at 7:46, the car was found locked and abandoned. Maura Murray's life had gone off the rails in the year prior to her disappearance. She was an ultra-high achiever and star athlete who got into West Point, spending about a year studying there before transferring to the University of Massachusetts Amherst. In November 2003, she was found to be using a stolen credit card, a hard turn for someone who had once attended one of the most prestigious institutions in the nation. This little incident landed her on probation, a factor which will be important to remember here as we're going forward discussing her case. The days leading up to her disappearance were filled with more acute signs of trouble. The first clear sign of distress came on the night of Thursday, February 5th. While working a security shift at a UMass dorm, Maura took a phone call from her older sister, Kathleen. The conversation centered on Kathleen's own relationship problems and struggles with alcoholism. Shortly after, around 1 o'clock that same morning, Maura's supervisor found her in a state of collapse. She was described as being completely unresponsive and quietly repeating the two words, "my sister," over and over again. This emotional breakdown was so severe that her supervisor had to escort her back to her dorm room. Despite this breakdown, Maura didn't receive any formal mental health as a result of this incident. The pressure mounted over the weekend, and her father, Fred Murray, had come to visit, in part to help her shop for a more reliable car. On Saturday night, Maura borrowed her father's brand new Toyota Corolla to attend a party on campus. In the early hours of Sunday morning, at around 3:30, she crashed the car into a guardrail and dealt upwards of $10,000 in damage to the vehicle. The responding officer noted her inattentiveness, but, for reasons that remain unclear, didn't administer any field sobriety tests. Given the damage that was caused, I find this highly unusual. Unfortunately for Maura, this was another missed off-ramp to the catastrophe that was coming her way. It also came out that during her time as a cadet at the prestigious West Point Military Academy, she had faced an honor code violation for shoplifting. This is a serious offense under the Academy's strict code against such behavior. After all, the idea is that if a cadet is willing to engage in dishonesty, this person could be an extremely problematic officer in the future. Maura Murray's last known day was unusual to say the least, though it's clear that she had been planning something. The planning phase of whatever she was doing began shortly after midnight on the same day she disappeared. She used her personal computer to search MapQuest, as was the style at the time, for directions to two familiar, comforting destinations: the Berkshires and Burlington, Vermont. The deception began in the early afternoon, and at 1:24, she sent emails to her nursing professors and her work supervisor, inventing a family tragedy. She wrote that there had been a death in the family and that she would be gone for a week, which her family later confirmed was a complete lie. Her dorm room was later found with many of her belongings packed into boxes. While this was initially seen as evidence of a plan to leave for good, her sister has noted that Maura had recently moved into that room and may have never fully unpacked. That afternoon, she also sent a brief email to her boyfriend where she said she didn't really feel like talking, but would get in touch with him later. Ultimately, it was confirmed that she never reached out to discuss this with him. She made several phone calls to inquire about lodgings in New Hampshire and Vermont, including a condo in Bartlett where her family had vacationed, but she never booked a room. At 3:15, she stopped at an ATM and withdrew $280, nearly all the money in her bank account. Surveillance footage from this time confirmed she was alone, which will be a somewhat important factor going forward in the analysis. Shortly after the withdrawal, she visited a liquor store and purchased a fairly significant amount of alcohol for a single person. The events that transpired on that sharp corner of Route 112 are the heart of the mystery, and perhaps why this case has ingrained itself to such a degree in the public imagination. The analysis of this brief period relies on the accounts of two key witnesses and the physical evidence, or lack thereof, found at the scene. A local resident, Faith Westman, heard the loud thump from her house nearby. Peering through her window, she saw the disabled car and called the Grafton County Sheriff's Department at 7:27 p.m. to report the accident. Her initial 911 call log noted that she saw a man smoking in the car, a detail that has fueled years of speculation. However, she later clarified her account, stating that she didn't directly see a man, but rather a red glowing light from inside the car. She had assumed that this was a lit cancer kazoo, but upon further reflection, she admitted that it could have been from a cell phone. Notably, the surveillance footage from the ATM did confirm that she was alone, at least at that point. Of course, surveillance technology wasn't ubiquitous like it is now, so we only have a very narrow snapshot to confirm she was alone. Moments after Westman's call, another neighbor, a school bus driver named Butch Atwood, was driving home when he came upon the scene. He pulled over and saw a young woman, whom he presumed to be the driver, walking around the vehicle. He described her as cold and shivering, but not visibly injured or bleeding. Atwood offered to call for help, but Mora quickly refused, insisting she had already called for roadside assistance through AAA. This was almost certainly untrue, and cell service in the area was notoriously poor, and no such call was ever logged on her phone records or with the service. Feeling something was amiss, Atwood offered her a ride to his house, which was just a short distance away, so she could wait in the warmth and safety. Again, she declined, and respecting her wishes but still concerned, Atwood drove the 100 or so yards to his home and immediately called the police himself. Notably, I've found that some people online give Butch heat for not trying harder to rescue her from the scene, and personally, I just don't get it. Butch would have been aware that a young woman may have legitimate reasons for not wanting to get into the car with a lone male who promised that he lived nearby. Mora, of course, would have had no way to tell if he was actually a friendly neighbor looking to help, or perhaps a more sinister force. But as we're about to discuss, the fact that his house was close may have specifically been the reason she didn't go with him, according to some theories of the case. When a police officer arrived at 7:46, the scene was eerily quiet, and Mora's Saturn was there with its doors locked. A search of the immediate area revealed nothing. Crucially, there were no footprints in the fresh snow leading away from the road into the surrounding woods. The following day, this finding was reinforced by one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. A police tracking dog was brought to the scene and given one of Mora's gloves to establish a scent. The dog tracked her scent from the car for approximately 100 yards east along the road before the trail abruptly stopped. To the canine handlers and detectives, this almost always means one thing: Mora got into a vehicle. Over the past 2 decades, the void of concrete evidence in Mora Murray's disappearance has been filled by speculation, debate, and 3 dominant theories. Each attempts to explain how she vanished from Route 112, and each is supported by some pieces of the puzzle while being contradicted by others. The first theory, and the one initially favored by law enforcement, is that Mora chose to disappear and start a new life. The evidence for this is somewhat compelling, and I can see why it was favored in the immediate aftermath. Her actions on February 9th all looked like the preparations of someone planning to run away. The idea of a tandem driver is often linked to this theory. Under this theory, an unknown accomplice was either following her or was scheduled to meet her at a prearranged spot. This would explain how she was able to leave the crash scene so quickly and why the canine scent trail ended abruptly on the road. However, the credibility of this theory has taken a nosedive as time has gone on. Her credit cards and bank accounts have remained untouched since that day, and her identity has been dormant since then. Successfully starting over with a new identity with a few $100 is, for all practical purposes, impossible. The second major theory claims that Mora, panicked and likely intoxicated, fled the crash scene on foot to avoid a charge and the devastating legal consequences it would have. As previously mentioned, she had been caught using a stolen credit card just months prior, and she was on probation for this activity. In this scenario, some theorists claim she ran from the road, perhaps intending to circle back later or simply hide until the police were gone. Lost and disoriented in the dark, cold woods, she could have succumbed to hypothermia or an injury. The White Mountains wilderness is vast and unforgiving, and it's plausible that her remains could have been missed in subsequent searches. This theory, however, runs into 2 significant evidentiary roadblocks, and I don't buy it at all. First is the complete lack of footprints in the snow leading from the car into the woods. While not fully impossible to explain, it's a major inconsistency that would have to have her traveling far down the road in a narrow window of time and slipping into the woods. It would also require the searchers to have missed any signs of this happening. The second and more powerful contradiction is the canine scent trail. A dog tracking a person who walked into the woods would follow that scent off the road. Instead, Mora's scent trail stopped cold on the pavement, providing the strongest piece of physical evidence that she left the area in a vehicle, not on foot. Another more plausible variant of this theory is that she panicked and got into a vehicle to get away from the scene. Under this variant, she didn't take the offer from Butch precisely because she believed that he was a local and that the cops would show up and arrest her at his house. Instead, she waited for another vehicle to come along that promised a more distant escape, an idea which neatly leads into the third theory. The third theory, long maintained by Mora's family, is that she was the victim of a crime. This scenario aligns perfectly with the evidence from the sniffer dog unit. It suggests that another vehicle stopped near the crash scene. An opportunistic predator who saw a vulnerable young woman alone on a dark road. In her panicked state, wanting only to get away from the scene before police arrived, her usual caution may have been diminished. Accepting a ride from the first person who stopped would have seemed like the quickest solution to her immediate problem. This would explain her rapid disappearance and the scent trail ending on the road. Once she got into the vehicle, if this was with a predator, her fate would likely have been sealed at that point. Personally, this is the theory I favor since it aligns best with the canine evidence. 20 years after she vanished, the case remains open and active, and her disappearance remains one of the most actively talked about true crime mysteries. The scene is a mass rally in Pyongyang on October 14, 1945. The city is electric with a mix of relief and uncertainty. After 35 years of brutal Japanese colonial rule, Korea is free, but its fate is being decided by foreign powers. In the north, the Soviet Red Army are the liberators, and they've gathered the people to present a hero. He's introduced as the legendary guerrilla commander, General Kim Il-sung, a name whispered in awe for his daring exploits against the Japanese occupiers. The crowd waits, expecting to see a seasoned, perhaps grizzled, veteran warrior. Instead, a boyish man in his early 30s, wearing the crisp uniform of a Soviet Red Army captain, steps to the microphone. A murmur of confusion and disappointment ripples through the crowd. This wasn't the larger-than-life general they had imagined. That moment of public bewilderment is the seed of the entire mystery surrounding the man who would eventually become North Korea's eternal president. The man before the crowd wasn't a demigod of legend, but an ambitious and politically astute guerrilla named Kim Song-ju, who had been carefully selected by his Soviet patrons. His entire subsequent rule, and the very foundation of the North Korean state, would be predicated on closing the gap between the man he was and the myth he needed to become. To understand the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, one must first understand the two parallel lives of its founder. There's the hagiography constructed by the state for their founding hero, and the far more complex reality pieced together by historians. We'll first explore the official, state-sanctioned legend taught to every North Korean from birth. Then we'll contrast it with the historical consensus and examine the persistent imposter theory as a symptom of this foundational deception. In North Korea, the story of Kim Il-sung doesn't begin with his birth, but rather it begins with his ancestors. The official story portrays his family as a long line of preordained patriotic revolutionaries, establishing what is known as the Mount Paktu bloodline. His great-grandfather is credited with leading the attack on the American merchant ship General Sherman in 1866. His father, Kim Hyung-jik, wasn't merely an activist, but a pioneer of Marxism who led the anti-Japanese independence movement. His mother, Kang Pansok, on the other hand, is venerated as the mother of the Korean nation, who embodied all that is virtuous about the Korean people. She's portrayed perhaps not entirely as a human entity, but as a vessel that was created through the collective will of the Korean people to give birth to their great liberator. This narrative frames the Kim family not as participants in the liberation struggle, but as its very heart and soul, destined to lead the nation. From this hallowed lineage, according to the official sources, the young Kim emerged as a revolutionary prodigy. Official anecdotes, taught to school children as historical fact, describe him vowing to defeat the Japanese imperialists at the tender age of 5 while sitting on his mother's knee. Other stories suggest that as a child, he lectured adults on Marxist principles, not due to anything that he had learned, but almost as if he was divinely ordained. Naturally, according to these official stories, these adults were shocked, baffled, and instantly converted to the cause. At just 14, he supposedly founded the movement that would eventually overthrow Japanese rule, a seminal moment in the nation's revolutionary history. His childhood is depicted as a series of heroic acts of resistance, from defacing Japanese textbooks to organizing his fellow students into acts of revolutionary mischief. The centerpiece of the legend is his role as the singular, brilliant commander of the entire Korean resistance against Japan. The official narrative places him at a secret guerrilla base on the slopes of the sacred Mount Paktu, the mythical birthplace of Dangun, the founder of the First Korean Kingdom. This location is no accident, and it deliberately fuses Kim's revolutionary struggle with Korea's deepest national myths. From this sacred ground, he is said to have single-handedly organized and led the Korean people's revolutionary army, from which he liberated the Korean people from Japan. In this telling, all other anti-Japanese resistance figures, many of whom were his superiors in reality, are either erased from history or demoted to the status of his loyal followers. Crucially, his son and heir, Kim Jong-il, is said to have been born in a humble log cabin at the Mount Paktu secret camp in 1942. This nativity was supposedly marked by divine omens, including a double rainbow appearing in the sky and a new star shining brightly in the heavens. When historians peel back the layers of propaganda, a starkly different picture emerges. The man who would rule North Korea for nearly half a century was born Kim Song-ju on April 15, 1912, in a village near Pyongyang. His family was not a lineage of revolutionaries, but was, ironically, part of Korea's small but influential Protestant community. His grandfather was a Protestant minister, and his father was even named after St. Peter. Like many Koreans resentful of Japanese rule, his family fled to Manchuria around 1920, seeking refuge and opportunity. It was in Manchuria, not Korea, that Kim Song-ju received his revolutionary education. He attended Chinese schools, and according to some who knew him later, he may have preferred to communicate in Chinese rather than Korean. As a teenager, he was drawn into the world of underground Chinese communist youth organizations and was briefly jailed for his activities. His path wasn't a uniquely Korean one, and it was forged within the broader, communist-led anti-Japanese struggle in Manchuria. He joined a Chinese-led guerrilla force and proved to be a legitimately capable and courageous fighter, eventually rising to become a division commander by his mid-20s. It was during this period, around 1935, that he adopted the name Kim Il-sung, a name already famous and associated with an earlier, legendary anti-Japanese hero. While he was one of the more effective Korean commanders in the region, historians believe he was a mid-level officer in a Chinese-led army, taking orders from Chinese superiors. He wasn't the supreme commander of a unified Korean force by any means. The historical record shows that by late 1940, the elite Japanese Kwantung Army had effectively crushed the guerrilla resistance in Manchuria. Kim and the remnants of his unit were forced to flee across the border into the Soviet Union. He spent the remainder of the conflict, from late 1940 until Japan's surrender in 1945, in a Soviet military camp near Khabarovsk. There, he was commissioned as a captain in the Soviet Red Army's 88th Rifle Brigade, a special unit composed of exiled Chinese and Korean fighters. It was here, in a Soviet camp in 1941, that his son was born. The child, who would later be known as Kim Jong-il, wasn't given a revolutionary Korean name, but a Russian one, Yuri Kim. The chasm between the man and the myth gave rise to a persistent and sensational rumor, which has come to be termed the imposter theory. This theory claims that the man who returned to Pyongyang in 1945 wasn't the guerrilla fighter Kim Il-sung at all, but a fraud named Kim Song-ju. Under this theory, he had stolen the identity of a much older, more famous, and genuinely legendary anti-Japanese hero who had perished in battle. This idea flourished in the chaotic post-war environment, fueled by Korean confusion at the 1945 rally, and by early Western intelligence reports. There's even a now declassified CIA dossier that treated the claim as credible, suspecting the Soviets inserted their agent into the Korean fray. Despite its durability as a piece of Cold War propaganda, the academic consensus has thoroughly debunked the literal imposter theory. The evidence against it is definitive, and witnesses who knew Kim Song-ju both before and after his time in the Soviet Union confirmed he was the same person. Japanese Kwantung Army records from the 1930s specifically identify the young guerrilla commander, using the alias Kim Il-sung, as a significant and wanted resistance figure. Most conclusively, his personal file has been found in Russian archives, confirming his identity and career path from Manchurian guerrilla to Soviet Red Army captain. However, the real significance of the imposter theory isn't its factual accuracy, but what its existence reveals. In a political sense, the man presented in 1945 was an imposter. The Soviets were presenting a 33-year-old captain as the legendary general the people expected to see. However, the real legendary general who first went by the name Kim Il-sung was Kim Kung-chan, and he was in his 60s when he fell in combat in 1942. By 1945, Kim Il-sung had already been using that same name for over a decade. Essentially, the imposter theory is an urban legend born from a kernel of truth. Kim Il-sung did take the name of someone much more famous in the resistance movement, but he actively used this name long before he was the front runner to lead a communist Korea. It's a distorted echo of the population's legitimate confusion and the regime's foundational act of political misdirection. The theory is a ghost born from the fog of a propaganda campaign, a symptom of a much deeper deception about who Kim Il-sung truly was and where his authority came from. When Kim returned to Korea in 1945, he was a political unknown. He had no independent power base and faced numerous, more prominent rivals from domestic communist and nationalist factions. His sole claim to power was the backing of a foreign occupying army, the Soviet Union, which saw him as a pliable asset who spoke Russian. To survive and consolidate power, he needed more than Soviet tanks. He needed a compelling narrative of his exploits. The creation of the Kim Il-sung myth was a calculated and essential political project. It recast him from a legitimate combatant against the Japanese to the sole liberator of the nation, providing him with the heroic, nationalist legitimacy he desperately lacked. By establishing himself as the singular leader of the revolution, he could brand all rivals as traitors or factionalists, justifying their ruthless purges in the 1950s. Most importantly, by linking his family to the sacred Mount Paktu and the mythical origins of the Koreans, he laid the ideological groundwork for a hereditary succession. This, of course, is a concept entirely alien to Marxism, but this myth transformed him from a communist premier like any other into a dynastic founder whose family still rules North Korea.